Good afternoon, and let me wish you a warm welcome to this new session of Kitchen Philosophy. We've had several of these conversations over the last few months, but I'm particularly happy that it's the first one where I can physically be in the same room with my guest. My name is Philippe Sandt, and I'm very happy to host today Rend Stepahn. Rend, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And thanks for giving us of your time. We have, as you know, in this Zoom, you have the facility to ask questions during this conversation. So please use the proper icon at the bottom of your screen to do so. And we'll try to answer the questions as they come, or if not convenient, we'll save them for the end. So I hope we'll have another load of questions, and we'll do everything we can to address them. So, Rend, let me say a few words about you first. You have had a very successful career in management consulting with very prestigious firms like first Booz & Co., which is also known formerly as Booz & Hamilton for those who are older than you, but primarily also with the BCG, where the Boston Consulting Group, where you were a partner for about 18 years. And you worked across the world, Dubai, the US, Australia. You then, for 2 years, set up the European branch of a smaller, successful consulting and fast-growing consulting firm. But the primary reason why we're here together today is because you have set up your own business, and that was about a year ago. And this consulting business of yours, which has various activities, is based on a very straightforward premise and promise. I would call it even a very straightforward positioning. And actually what Rend is telling us is at the heart of companies' issues, at the root of the underperformance, there is a common phenomenon that Rend calls, and we're going to tease him about that, complexity. Complexity, you say, is something that if you manage to kill it, will unleash companies, organizations' potential, take them back to growth. You're saying complexity stifles innovation, creativity. Complexity stifles motivation as well, I believe, and engagement of the human capital of a company, and many other things. So that leads me to my first question. What is this complexity, which seems to be the mother of all evils in organizations?
To some extent it is. So I'm sure we're going to spend this hour covering that. Thank you for the intro, Philippe. I'm very happy to be here. Yes, you're right. I mean, I set up the company we set up is called NCX, for Ending Complexity. And we cover multiple things, like you mentioned. We do business intelligence, we do business advisory, and we do business build-up. The main premise is that we decomplexify business models to unlock growth and unleash performance. And that's basically what you have mentioned. And the first question is to ask, what is complexity? And what I have seen dealing with leaders and senior decision makers is that while it is an important question, this is not what they're worried about. There are multiple definitions of complexity, complicatedness, chaos, and the opposite terms, simplicity or other things. But I have never seen an actual business problem resolved when we spend time figuring out what is the definition of complexity around it. The way complexity manifests itself is when decision makers actually feel that they are somehow spinning their wheels, that they are expending a lot of their personal, team, organization, energy and effort on things where they do not see a lot of actually movement going forward. That's what I call constant motion is not forward movement. And without knowing that it is complexity, when we actually work with them, identify that complexity, meaning complex processes, complex strategies, complex thinking, complex organizations, complex transformation programs, are at the heart of this feeling that the organization, the people are not moving forward. And that's why I don't dwell on academic definitions of complexity. I am sure that some of these are in their field of applications correct, useful. For what I focus on, which is very pragmatic stuff, the most important thing is to say, well, I think most leaders know complexity, what they see it, they don't know how to deal with it.
Okay. Well, I'm not starving for an academic definition, obviously, but what I'm starving for, and probably the people who listen to us, is examples. Can you give us an example of a situation where you've been able to spot something that probably a bit like, when you have glue in your hand and you can get rid of it, the leader would feel that something was going wrong, was hampering his desire to grow his company, and you managed to really identify what was wrong and address it.
I can give one example, and I'm sure we will give many examples throughout this hour. Because what's most important is, maybe we address that after the example, is to come back and understand what is the root of complexity. Because we need to understand what the roots are, so that the leaders and decision makers start actually spotting some of the things that would lead them into complexity. The example I can start with is a meeting with the CEO of a large industrial company. I did not know the CEO. I was invited to a meeting to meet him. Was scheduled for half an hour. And, as usual, you come and wait in the, let me call it the antechamber of the king. It's not what it is, but you know what I mean. Sure. You wait a little bit before you see the CEO. And I noticed on the walls, there were, the classical, this is our strategy, this is our vision, the classical things for the company, which was very good. But what took, 3/4 of the wall was a massive description of a transformation program with, I can't remember the exact number, 12 major work streams, and, each one of them formed by different working teams, and, Gantt charts of where everybody is going, and colors to actually show if they are progressing or not. I'm sure, you are familiar with these things, and
I've seen a few, yes.
Most of the people have seen this and actually applied them, which is not by itself bad. But then when I went and to meet the CEO, great guy, he said, look, he told me a little bit about, what they're doing, the transformation program. And he said, well, Rend, I wanted to know, how can you help us in actually managing this transformation program? Because frankly, we have not been moving forward. And my intuitive reaction was, if you want me to help you manage this program, this is going to be a very short conversation. The point I was trying to make is that when complexity overwhelms, in this example, a transformation program, you cannot manage it. And this is where we go wrong. We try to manage it, we put systems around it, we have a lot of experts that tell us, this is how you should do it. It's too late, you cannot actually manage it. What you need to do is actually extract it out. You have to defeat it, you have to kill it, you have to fight it. And, I stayed with the CEO and explained, all this around this position about complexity and why the main, as I've seen it, I did not do the diagnostic, but there was a high probability that the main cause of why he was not moving along was that the program was too complex. And it was the case.
I mean, the toolbox is so big, there are so many tools, nobody even remembers how to use them, and they've lost and
too many things, right? Trying to focus on too many things, bringing experts that are typically warranted, right? But they tend to go, overboard with their frameworks and things like that. And this creates complexity feeds on complexity. I call it the dark side. The dark side feeds on the dark side. And you get to a point where you don't even see it. You think that the world is like this, and you continue feeding on this, and you cannot go out of it. And you cannot fix it by continuing to do the same thing. As Einstein said, you cannot solve problems with the same mindset that created them, right? I mean, that's very, very clear. And so in this particular example, we continued the discussion for a couple of hours, and then, we continued helping the CEO. And what we did is we actually redesigned completely the transformation program. We refocused on 3 major activities, 3 major deliverables. We took out a lot of the frameworks that were absolutely irrelevant. We were basically focusing on, let's get the signal within the noise that is there. And that's one of the examples of what complexity can do to you. But that's an example of complexity, absolutely.
And so you started to answer a bit my next question, which is, why is it so harmful? Obviously, there are many reasons, but what comes out as being the reasons why you think that complexity can be so detrimental to the performance of a company, as opposed to many other issues that in management you can face? You can face issues which are lack of competencies. It can be lack of engagement of some people. That can be, there are many things. You can have a cost issue. Why do you pinpoint this one as being so relevant, so critical?
If I tell you exhaustion, fragility, and blindness, we may have a good start of a conversation. Complexity is extremely harmful, not a little bit harmful, it's extremely harmful. And it's harmful in ways we don't see it, because actually it is embedded in everything we do. The first one is the easiest one, but we have to look at it and identify it. The first one is to say it's actually about exhaustion. Why? Because if your complexity is about doing things that do not matter, right? Because either within a process, you are dealing with so many facets of a process to get to a point where, instead of getting to a point in a direct line, you are actually taking all these turns, etc., to get to a point. So you're doing a lot of things that do not matter. And by definition, that actually takes out energy, takes out a lot of your energy.
To do the things that really matter.
Your organization, and then in comparison, because everything is in comparison, the people who focus on the things that do matter, they tend to actually move much, much ahead. So first is, as I said, weakness and exhaustion. If you continue doing things that do not matter, you tend to be exhausted. Think about yourself as a person. And organizations are the same. And by the way, countries are the same. We can talk about that. So the first one is that part, which I think is relatively obvious or intuitive to get. The second part is fragility. Fragility is different from weakness. Weakness is, the inability to perform, because when you're weak, you cannot perform. Fragility is the inability to sustain shocks. That's different. Mm-hmm. And why do complexity leads to fragility compared to the immune system? The same. If you are constantly weak, if you're constantly fatigued, if you're constantly sick, between brackets, right? Even though you don't have a high sickness, your immune system is actually degrading. And when you get hit with a shock, virus as a person, or a crisis, economic crisis, or other as a country or as an organization, you're much more fragile. So that's extremely difficult. And the third thing, which is very difficult to do, is that it's blindness, because people don't see it. As I mentioned, when did you have executive team meetings where one of the main questions, day in, day out, I'm not saying once in a lifetime, once in 10 years, one of the main questions, day in, day out, every week, every month, is, what are we doing about complexity? I found it to be virtually non-existent, that question. And hence you have a blindness to the actual cause of what is happening. And that is the worst thing, because you feed the vicious circle. So complexity is very, very harmful. And it is also, in my seminars, and I always ask, three questions. And the first question is, what is your estimate of the level of complexity in your organization? Second is how negative you think the impact of that level of complexity is on the organization. And third, in the coming 2 to 3 years, do you think complexity is increasing or decreasing? And invariably, I get about 70% of answers that actually say complexity is high or very high. The impact on organization is negative or very negative. And in the next 2 to 3 years is going to increase or dramatically increase. So we see that people, when asked the question, they identify it. They know it is harmful. They can't put their hands around how to deal with it.
So, without willing it, you've given me a very good definition of complexity, which I have noted here, is spending a lot of time doing things that do not matter. And
that's one of the
definitions. One of the definitions, but that's a critical part of your own vision of it. Let me offer this, which I drove on my personal experience, and maybe you can relate to it and comment. As you know, I've had a lot of experience in companies in managerial roles before I became a consultant myself a few years ago. The thing that always struck me that I've learned over time is that we never spend enough time deciding what are the key things we're going to do. And we have this leniency to decide as a team, could be an executive team or the company, we're going to do those very critical 10, 12, 15 things, which obviously are never done because nobody can do 12 or 15 things regarding of the size of the company or the organization. So the prioritization is a very critical part of leadership. It takes to give up on some things, so consciously deciding for and against, but it is to me the critical path to alignment. And today I do this exercise as a consultant. When I move to a company which has hired me, I go to the people I interview and ask them, what are the 3 most important things you have to do or the company has to do this year? The degree of misalignment is very often scary. And here you understand that there is intrinsically complexity, because if people do different things, at the end of the day, well, you don't have a woven fabric. You have pieces, and at the end of the year, you probably don't get the results you wanted. Is it in your as opposed to that, I am working for a company today, just finishing a mission on a different topic. The degree of alignment is remarkable, and they are damn successful. The growth is like that. So this doesn't make a statistics, but it's the confirmation. So how do you relate to this experience I'm mentioning here?
Well, it is quite similar to the example I gave when the transformation program was very, very wide. This is very, very constant, very common, very widespread everywhere. So you're absolutely right what you're describing. That I've seen it, in my dealing with different decision makers, across the world. It is not related to a particular culture. It is not related to a particular industry, to a particular function. It is quite widespread. But what led me to think this through and actually push the discussion around it is that telling a decision maker, telling a leader that we just need to prioritize, for me, is not enough. Because first, they will tell you, yes, I know, but I've already prioritized. Then you have the discussion whether actually 5 things are better than 10 things and all that. What I've found is that there are 3 root causes for complexity to creep in that would lead you to, syndromes or symptoms like this one. And these 3 root causes, when you actually put them in front of decision makers, you have an aha moment. And they say, okay, it may be coming from that. The first root cause is what I call the illusion of complexity. It means that we are in a world that we are told that the world is becoming more and more complex.
But that's true, isn't it?
Well, let's see. What I put in my book, I actually take a extract that actually says exactly the same thing. You know, we are overwhelmed with information, with innovation and all that. You know, we can't keep up in all this stuff. And what I say, as you know, a small surprise, but you know, the audience can see it right now, that was written 200 years ago. The same article, you could have, you know, read it today. That's what I call local myopia. We have a tendency to believe that where we live, the time and place, is the most complex, the most dramatic, etc. And in believing so, what we do is that we feed the complexity of the world, meaning we believe that we have to address the complexity of the world with more and more complexity, which, let me open a small parenthesis here, which is at the heart of it. I define complexity as the dark side of sophistication. Sophistication is a good thing. We need to become more sophisticated. We need to get more insights. We have to get more innovation. Complexity is the dark side, when we just complexify things for the sake of complexifying them. So what I have observed is that if decision makers actually at least ask the question, is this problem as complex as it appears to be? Is this problem as complex as my management team telling me it is? Is this problem as complex as my experts are telling me it is? That's already a first way to do it. Illusion of complexity, vicious circle. The second root cause of complexity is what I call the incremental paradox. The incremental paradox is, you know, the incremental improvement. All companies do incremental improvement. I worked for a company
like that for 20 years.
Absolutely. Continuous improvement by itself is not bad. No. Every decision you make is actually warranted because you've analyzed the pluses and minuses, etc. The problem is that it leads to a paradox where continuous improvement over a long period of time leads you to a suboptimal outcome. That's very important. It's a paradox because I'm not saying every decision is wrong. I'm saying that when you do it for a long time, you're going to get to a suboptimal outcome versus people who rethink the problem from the beginning. And that's another way for people to think, oh, have I been doing continuous improvement for a long time? Maybe I should rethink, because continuous improvement actually feeds complexity. Let complexity actually steadily go in.
Are you also alluding to the fact that when you do continuous improvement, you end up with a Kodak syndrome or whatever, meaning your Kodak films get better and better, and some computer company invents the numeric...
That's one aspect. The other aspect, you know, if we relate to, sometimes I call it the home renovation syndrome. You can have a home, then your family grows, and then you add a garage, you add a kitchen and all that. You know, it's a great home, and every decision you've made is right. 20 years after the fact, the homes that are popping up next to you are way better than you, and you cannot improve your home to become as good as theirs. So incremental improvement locks you in a complex space, and that's a paradox. And I'm not saying, to be specific, that incremental improvement is wrong, because every decision is warranted. But leaders have to say that when we do it for a long time, there is a high potential that we have built in a lot of complexity. One of the examples, actually, is the most recent one, is the 737 MAX.
Yeah, I was about to ask you this. I thought you were very daring when you wrote me this little paragraph saying Boeing 737 complexity. Not that I dispute it at all, but that's a very controversial matter, and that's a very emotionally loaded one. So I'm hungry to know why there is complexity at the heart of this tragedy.
Exactly. It is emotional because we're talking about lives of people. And you know, what's important is to illustrate this incremental paradox. The incremental paradox actually says, you need to be aware and ask yourself the question whether you've gone too far in your incremental improvement. It is not about hindsight, about me sitting here in hindsight and say, you engineers did not know what you were doing. It is not the point. Is it about decision makers? While approving incremental improvement, asking this question more and more. And my belief is that when they ask this question more and more, they will probably not fall into the extremes of what happened. The example of the 737 is tragic, but from a technical point of view, is very simple to explain. Airbus A320 did their neo. Neo meaning they replaced some parts of the plane with composite to make it lighter, and they replaced the engines with engines that are much more efficient, 15% I think more efficient in terms of consumption, fuel burn. The small problem, between brackets, is that these engines are much wider. The A320 is a higher aircraft on the ground. So if you put an A320 and a 737, you can see they are like this when they are actually on the tarmac. So the 737 wanted to do the same thing, replacing composite material, relatively easy. Trying to fit the engines did not work. They touched the ground. So what did they do? For the first time, they actually put the engines much higher on the wing. They are about 20 centimeters higher on the wing than what they're supposed to be. That changes the whole dynamic of the plane. And what did they do? That's another incremental improvement. Or we can solve the problem by actually just going another further step, and another further step, and another further step.
So I mean, they do an incremental change, which creates another problem. So they do another change to cover the...
To cover that, and to cover that, and to cover that. And by the way, engineers are phenomenal, right? The engineers who created that, that's warranted. I'm not saying, oh, they should not be doing. What I'm saying is that decision-making, to actually say, at some point, something is becoming too complex for us to even manage. I cannot predict that's going to fail, but it's becoming too complex for us to even manage. And what happened is that because of the whole dynamics of the plane have changed, they have to create a software to stabilize the plane. And that software was too complex and was not responding appropriately. That is an example of incremental improvement gone too far. So that's the second example. And the third example, I call it the explosive mix. And the explosive mix is when you put...
so meaning the illusion of complexity.
Illusion of complexity creates
incrementalism.
Incrementalism. And the third one is the explosive mix.
Explosive mix.
And the explosive mix is when you put three...
I'm glad this one was not related to the 737. But,
absolutely not. And you actually put three things together, right? You put what I call complex experts. And by the way, most experts are complex because it is their raison d'etre, right? It is their raison d'etre. You put complex experts in what I call ambiguous domains with leaders who surrender to the experts, meaning letting them do what they need to do. Go with the flow. Let's start with ambiguous domains, right? Ambiguous domains, technical and science domains have very little ambiguity in the sense that you put 10 technical and science experts in a room, and in 95% of the time, they tend to come up with the right solution for the problem, right? The solutions can be a little bit different, but not widely different, because, the parameters are much clearer, scientific laws are much clearer, and then they tend to come up. And it is geared in a way that simpler solutions tend to win at the end, because, that's the way it is. In ambiguous domains, economics, management, politics, social sciences, you put 10 experts in the room and they give you 10 different answers. And the problem is that each expert goes into a lot of effort to actually explain and support why their answer is better. You have economists that believe that, a big government is better than a small government. Economists that believe that you should go out of a recession by actually giving people money to spend. We all know all this. And this has been going on not from yesterday, for tens of years, right? If not sometimes close to a century on some things. When you put experts who tend to complexify things in ambiguous domains, and you have leaders who do not stop them, which means they go with the flow, decision makers, that's an explosive mix. And the explosive mix meaning there is a very high probability that complexity is actually in there, even though people cannot sometimes see it. So with these three things, again, this is not a hindsight, and this is not a Monday tip where you wake up one morning, oh, what is my 5 tips for the day? It is a mindset change to say, if you can start spotting these three root causes, that's your first step towards actually addressing complexity. Again, the illusion of complexity. Always question whether it is as complex as people say it is. Second, the incremental. Have we done a lot of incremental improvements? A lot. And the third, do we have a lot of complexity experts in ambiguous domains, and have we surrendered as leaders our role to actually defy them? These are the root causes.
But if I try to challenge one of the things you said,
yes.
which is the complexity of the world.
Yeah.
What I observe as a citizen, like you probably do as well, is
yes.
in a world which is complex, let's not say it's more or less complex than before, let's say it's complex. What is very harmful to the way our politicians manage us or whatever is the fact that there is an oversimplification of things which are complex, which is, put it this way, which are sophisticated, to talk about the bright side of this complexity. And things are simplified, oversimplified, reduced to sound bites to serve ideological purposes. It's partly true in politics,
yes.
where you would burn people just by saying that they have eaten lobster, even if they don't eat it. You would do all kinds of things about energy sources, where you have literally religion wars, whereas reality is way more complex than those sound bites would suggest. So my question to you is, the answer to complexity is not simplification.
Well, let's be very clear on that. That's a good one. Being simplistic is the other side of the coin of complexity. And it is as dangerous as complexity itself, simplistic. So again, if we cite Einstein, because I like a lot what he said, we should make things as simple as possible, but not more. There is always a place where you fall into the simplistic side. You talked about, sound bites and all that. These two extremes are just the flip side of the same coin. They are both on the dark side. They're absolutely irrelevant. And, and you can feel that people fall into simplistic reasoning. You can look at any debate on TV or things like that, and you hear a lot of the simplistic reasoning.
Sure.
And sometimes you hear a lot of the complex reasoning, where you say, okay, what this guy is saying? Or sometimes it's so simple that people are arguing, very basic stuff. It is very difficult to be simple and not simplistic. It is very difficult. And that is the big challenge. Why do people do simplistic or say simplistic things? Because complex is very difficult to explain. And sorry, not very difficult to explain to you and me. It's very difficult to explain to them. If you do not understand something, you cannot explain it properly.
Sure.
Not understand in the sense of being able to have all the complex frameworks around it. There are a lot of bright people who can give you concepts that are very sophisticated in the sense of complex, etc. When I say when they don't understand, I mean that in their thinking, they have not arrived to a simple solution. So they only put forward the complex solution. And if people cannot react to the complex solution, the flip side of the coin is simplistic. Oh, I cannot understand what's going on. Let me just, throw a couple of sound bites, and maybe that is the case. That's what's happening right now. That I call it the trap of the extreme, of either being complex or simplistic. Simple is in the middle.
So when you meet a decision maker, a
yes.
CEO or whomever, and you are extracting those three roots that you described earlier on, which are the illusion of complexity, which is the downsides of incrementalism or whatever you call it. And when you describe the third thing, which is explosive mix, how do they react? In other words, do you have overall positive reactions where people start a very quick introspection saying, shit, that's me, that's us? Or do you have kind of reluctance to admit that they can fall into those three or some or two or three of those typical, I would say, situations you describe?
Well, as you would imagine, the reaction of leaders and decision makers is wide range. Some people very quickly say, I want to know more, I want to explore more. And that could be one very good attribute of leadership. Some others actually say, I don't believe this, I don't understand what it is. In most cases, however, when we take the time to actually, when I say time, I mean, 2 or 3 afternoons. I'm not saying take the time 3 years. When you take the time to actually discuss what this means and relate it to the specifics of their own business, their own problems, in more than 80% of the cases, people actually get the awareness. So the remedies, that's why I call it the remedies to these root causes, they start with what I call take the red pill. And you may remember that's a reference to the Matrix movie in 1999.
I'm not that familiar.
Yes. So the Matrix is very simple. I mean, the red pill, the Matrix is a science fiction movie by definition about machines taking over, the computers taking over the world, and basically they feed us a certain view of the world, and there are very few renegades who have awakened and they have said, okay, this is not what we've been fed. The world is actually different from what it is. And the red pill, blue pill metaphor is, if you take the red pill, you actually stop this program from feeding you how the world is, and you see it as it actually is. So it's the same kind of philosophical things from Socrates, etc., that actually say, look at the world as it is, question what it is. So the first thing is basically taking the red pill, which means I actually tell leaders,
as opposed to the blue pill in Matrix, if I recall correctly, because I know a little bit of Matrix, I was playing games, where they feed you with something that pampers you with illusions and
exactly. So the first step is awareness.
Because there is another blue pill.
I know, but we're not talking about this. I know, I cannot escape that comparison all the time.
Sure.
But the first thing we talk about is awareness, because this thing is about leadership. This thing is about decision making, which ultimately leads to the proper performance that we're talking about. So you cannot actually escape the first step, which is awareness. If you do not know what the problem is, you cannot solve it. So I focus a lot on my seminars and actually on this first step of awareness. So I work a lot with decision makers to actually say, let me try to help you figure out if there are, and there always are, root causes like the ones I described. So are there root causes where problems actually could be more simple than you think they are? That's the complexity illusions. Are there root causes where you have been doing a lot of incremental improvements and you're stuck because of that? And are there root causes because you are overwhelmed with ambiguous experts and your organization have not been reacting in the proper way? And that is a proper thing. In 2 or 3 sessions of 2 or 3 afternoons, we can get to a lot of good outcomes around, I think this may be an area where complexity has actually went in, this here. And then, that's the first one. That's taking the red pill, starting to become aware. And it's a process, by the way. It's not like you take a pill and you wake up, right?
Speaking of which, maybe as a marketeer, I could suggest that you offer them a little box of red candies or whatever, symbolically once they have concluded the 3 afternoons successfully.
That's a good one. We'll think about something that is healthy.
But maybe a prop so that they can
a proper something that they can have. That's a good suggestion, Philippe. Appreciate that. That's the first step. And a red pill is an ongoing process, which means, of course, you start awakening, but awakening is actually something that you continue opening up your mind. The second thing is what I call they need to do is to reframe, redefine, and redesign. Because if you have been in complexity there is no way you can solve complexity from the inside. You have to step back, okay? You have to step back and actually say, how do I reframe the problem? Because the problem may be wrong. I can tell you that that particular step, reframing the problem, is probably one of the most important steps. I think it was Voltaire who said, men are defined by their ability to ask questions, not by their ability to give answers, or something like this. I'm sure I'm not saying it exactly.
You're close, I think.
Yes, but that ability to ask the right question, what gets you to reframe the problem, is at the heart of, after you've taken the red pill, figure out, okay, I think that there are actually complexity diseases, complexity problems in these areas. What do? You start with reframe, redefine, redesign. You reframe the problem, you redesign what needs to be done about it, you redefine what needs to be done about it, and then you redesign the past. The example that I've
reframe, redesign, and the third one is?
Reframe, redefine, redesign.
No, redesign, yes.
Yes. That's what you typically do, and that's what allows you to, this is based primarily on the Socrates method. What is the Socrates method? Socrates method is to actually say, you continue asking the proper questions so that you find the truth. Some people say Socrates is about the ability to persuade, etc. It could be used like that, but it's primarily about finding the truth. And sometimes you suffer the consequences. I mean, he was condemned to death. But it is about asking the questions. And, you know, the typical hierarchy of questions, and people forget that, the hierarchy of question, which is first, you know, what, how, why? That's, you know, when kids grow up, that's what they ask. What is this, right? How does it work? It comes the thing after that. And then they ask, why does it work in the way it works? And which leads you to the golden question, which is what if? When you understand these three hierarchies, you can actually say, what if it could be done differently? What if it could?
Well, I suppose you don't stick to one why, because there is another school of thought that says, yeah, you have to have, I don't know how many whys, you have to dig deeper. Why are we here today? Well, we're here today for an interview. Yeah, but why are we here for an interview? Well, we're here for an interview because...
Exactly.
Okay, but
it's the series. That's exactly the Socrates method that actually pushes, you know, the different questions. And why on its own is not enough if you do not ask the question of what if.
Sure.
Because what if gets you... Because when you ask what, how, and why, you are still in the description and the diagnostic and the analysis of the problem. Extremely important, because you need to get to the root cause. But it is the what if that gets you to the action, right? Otherwise, you know, we're still in more academic kind of discussions. It is the what if that actually says, okay, I've learned enough of the why, because I wanted to respond also about, you said there are so many whys we ask. Yes, but at some point we have to stop, right? Sure. We cannot just continue. And I've seen, and you know probably this term, analysis paralysis. I've seen, you know, so many leaders, decision makers asking for more and more analysis to actually thinking that they can actually master and understand the world 100% before they make a decision. That's not what we're talking about. You have to get to a point where you have enough comfort to be able to ask, what if? What if the problem we're talking about is not the right problem? What if the way we have been addressing it is not the way we've been addressing it? What if? And the what if is the golden question at the end. It has to stem from the hierarchy of the three questions, but the actual action comes from the what if. And so that's what they need to do. And the third step for me, I call it, is leading with courage. Because, you know, a leader has to be courageous. And it's, the world is full.
Because I assume a leader which is, which has taken your red pill is making a lot of enemies. And when I mean enemies, it has to be taken lightly. Obviously, I don't mean it.
Yes.
Because suddenly it makes enemies with a lot of barons who've been working on a certain, I would say, scope.
Yeah.
A lot of experts who are
Exactly.
Eating on the beast.
Exactly.
And sometimes it probably leads the leader him or she change course of this big ship is steering, he or she is steering. So I assume that must be a very uncomfortable thing to eat this red pill. Not to eat it, but to take the consequences.
Well, let me show you another route and tell me what's worse. The other route is that actually most leaders come in and they actually do change course, but without taking complexity out. And they face exactly the same problems. What you're talking about are problems of change. Change meaning, as you mentioned, there's political change, there is cultural change, there is, way of doing things change, and that happens all the time. And we know that a lot of 70% of change initiatives sometimes somehow do not work, they do not deliver, it's very difficult. Everything you're describing, I can say it exists in the complex world, because people do make changes. What I'm offering is that you actually do it, but while taking complexity out. You're gonna do it anyway, unless you're gonna come and actually say, "Oh, please continue doing what you were doing anyway." I think most leaders don't do that. Most leaders come and say, "Oh, I think we need to do this differently, etc." What I'm saying is that take that step further. Instead of just saying we need to do it differently, take it within the context of what I call anti-complex, and then think about how to reframe the problem, redefine, and then redesign. Think from the anti-complex approach, right? Take the red pill, figure out where the issues are. You're going to face that anyway. And so you have to lead with courage anyway, because it is true that when you take it from the anti-complex side, you're going to be facing not only political issues, you're going to be facing, as you mentioned, experts who would say, but that's the way we've been doing it all the time, why we need to do it differently. But tell me, can you give me an example of a important achievement? And important is not a scale. Important in the sense of an achievement that matters. Without courage, I can't find any.
No, I have an example in mind.
Okay.
You mentioned very important people like the Socrates, Voltaire, and some others, which is this very famous quote by Charles de Gaulle that you probably obviously know. In 1941, when he was trying to build the stronghold of La France Libre in the Middle East, and he has this in these memoirs of war, to the complex Orient, I was flying with simple ideas. And I've been scratching my head on this one for a long time, and now suddenly you're casting some light on it. On top of that, that happened in a region you're familiar with, because he was flying to Cairo, and as you know, probably General de Gaulle has been living in Lebanon for 2 years, a few years before that. So the Orient we're talking about was not the Far East, it was really the Middle East. So I think we can say it's a leader that didn't lack courage in very troubled times. And he is talking about simplicity, which I think is not the simplicity of somebody who is missing the nuances of complex situations, to say the least. So I think that gives us a good inspiration for what you're doing. And if I were the leader of NCX, I would probably want to put that on the as a headline of my company, because I think this is a great inspiration of what you're describing very well.
It is absolutely true. I think if we want to be semantically correct in the sense of aligning with what I just said, not rephrasing what General de Gaulle said. Okay, it's not the point. What he meant in regards to what we said is that I was going to the Orient with simplistic views. What he meant is that I was going without appreciating a lot of the nuance. I was going with bringing a lot of the views that I have of the world with me. That's what he.
That's what he meant? Right?
If he meant I was going with simple solutions, that's very powerful.
I think that's what he meant. And the reason why I'm saying that is precisely because he knew the regions. Exactly. That's right, because he had been living in Lebanon for 2 or 3 years. So I think he knew the complexities of the region, and he knew he could not handle them with his Western mentality.
But he's coming with simple solutions. And simple comes at the other end of complexity. That's people what they don't see. So that's one very good quote from General de Gaulle. Another quote which we use all the time is by Da Vinci, which he actually says, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, right? I mean, remember, I actually said that sophistication is something desirable. We confuse it with the undesirable complexity. And Da Vinci is saying simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. When you want to make something really sophisticated, you need to strip it down to its essence. That's what simplicity is all about. So I think these are great quotes.
You saw that last innovation coming from Danone, this beautiful Evian bottle, which has no label, which Absolutely. Has a perfectly, I would say, ultimately simple design. And we shared that example together a few days ago, and I think that's a brilliant illustration also of simplicity, effective simplicity.
Exactly. If you can strip things down to what matters, that's extremely important. And we've seen it's very difficult to do. Okay. George Bernard Shaw, you probably heard that. He said at some point, and again, this is not the exact quote. He said, "I am sorry I wrote you a long letter. I did not have the time to write
I love this one, to be honest.
Because that takes the other thing we did not talk about a lot, which is simple is hard. That's why, as you mentioned, people are either very complex or very simplistic, because simple is hard, being in the middle. General de Gaulle figuring out the simple ideas to solve these problems. Danone coming up with that. Steve Jobs coming up with the simple way of putting the world within the small iPhone. All these are difficult to do. It's not easy. But at least the first thing we need to do is let's strip out complexity. Let's understand that complexity is there and not continue swimming in it in order to have the chance, the privilege, the opportunity to actually do great things that are simple.
Speaking of complexity, there is an example that most of us have been exposed to, which I see here in a question by a friend of mine. How do you see matrix organization and complexity? It is a call to move to other types of organization, isn't it?
Let's address. I want to address that within the frame of what I said. Reframe the problem, right? Reframe the problem, redefine, and then redesign. Reframing the problem meaning, going away from what we call a starting solution or starting beliefs. Organizations that are becoming more and more complex is something that is accepted by everybody. I've seen it. I've seen organization proposals from different firms, from internal. It's not only the experts firm, internally. It is just assumed that you would need more and more complex in the sense of more and more sophisticated organization to be able with the more and more complex world that we deal with. And that's why, you see matrix organizations, that multi-dimensional matrix organizations, sometimes different reporting lines, etc. There are so many examples on this front. Integration, for example, is something that is assumed to be a good thing. Let us buy another company, and then we will become bigger, and then economies of scale will be better, and then we will become better. It is assumed because of blindness.
Whereas all numbers defy that purpose. We know that
numbers
more than half of them fail miserably.
Numbers after the fact. But when you are actually doing that, there are very good numbers and great spreadsheets that actually show you that.
And you don't want to learn from others. You don't say because they failed.
They failed, but
my case is
of course it's different. Yeah. We know that. So what I'm trying to say to this example, that's a great one on matrix organization, is that we have a lot of things we take for granted. Okay, matrix organization is one of them. Integration is good is one of them. As if we have not yet reached the economies of scale, and we just need more to reach it. All these fail to include the existence and impact of complexity in the equation. I've seen it. I've seen it, when people try to, because when you, for example, want to decide on going into a matrix organization, very rarely, actually, you say one of the criteria is, will the organization be complex, and what is the implication on the lives of people and processes, etc.? I've seen it very rarely. This question is rarely asked. So in the decision making, if it's not asked, maybe the matrix organization would appear interesting because it could deal with some of the complex problems. So it comes back to blindness. We don't see complexity. We don't include it in our decision making criteria as one of the most important criteria, and we get to results like this one. I'm not saying matrix organizations are bad. I'm saying that most of the time you can deal with organizations that are much simpler. I'm not saying integration is bad. I'm saying most of the time you can have smaller units that are independent, that can actually perform better than that actually when you put them together. So these are pointers to when you decide, because we cannot have a general answer.
No, sure.
Otherwise we become simplistic, right? If I tell you matrix organizations do not work, that would be a very simplistic answer.
And a very iconoclast.
Yeah.
One question: when you are called, suppose I'm a CEO calling you and I say, Rend, I love what you do. I have this feeling that we're spinning our wheels, that we're spending a lot of energy, we don't produce much, we don't grow. I feel we're in the cage of whatever, all those things that you would call complexity.
Yeah.
What would be the critical clues, signs, or that would help you identify this complexity? You gave a good example at the beginning of this, which is this huge Gantt charts on the wall. You say, who the hell has produced this, and who can handle it? And probably nobody, for the latter at least. So what would be the signs, this thing that experience has taught you, that say, I'm going to ask a few questions, and I'm going to be probably able to raise where the problem comes from?
Well, there are signs that are typically obvious, and they don't need, either mine or your experience for 20 years. But then there are the root causes that we talked about that I'll come back to. The signs are, very quickly, example, very, very widespread transformation programs. Examples of processes, right? Where you have more people that actually manage a particular industrial process and make sure that the manuals are upgraded versus the people who are actually producing, right? I mean, you can see a lot of other things. In one of the car companies I've had the honor to work with, they had the ability to actually have, if I remember, anywhere close to 1,500 possible configurations for a car seat. Sometimes you could say, well, maybe there is something there. But beyond that, these are the things that typically you can see them. You can maybe brush them aside and say, but this is one of our competitive advantage, if we can offer a lot of sophistication that puts us in a market. But this is where I come back to the root causes I talked about. I come back to the root causes of, is the problem as complex as you think it is? Let's actually spend time on this. And again, these are addressed within 2 or 3 afternoons. This is not a big thing. The second is, have we been doing incremental improvements for a long time? That's a sign that complexity has somehow spread all over the place.
Okay.
And have we been using, especially in ambiguous domains, a lot of external experts without very strong, courageous challenging from the inside to say, I love your frameworks. It's intellectually challenging to me, but it's too complex for what we're trying to do. And these 3 kind of big questions, 3 investigations, in 90% of the time, they lead us to specific areas because at the end we're talking about, again, this is not an academic discussion, to specific areas where we can say, oh, we can do stuff here and here.
Okay.
And that can be done relatively quickly. As I mentioned, is typically 2 to 3 afternoons.
Ren, as we are approaching the end of this conversation
Yes.
already, time flies way too fast because we would hear you for a long time. What do you think of this famous acronym of the KISS acronym? Would you think that it's a sort of motto that has some value, the keep it simple, stupid? And would it be a good summary, although it's from a language level not particularly great, but a great motto for leaders, that they should always keep in mind that things have to be kept simple, and stupid meaning not overthought. That if not everybody can understand, probably we're already moving in the dark territory of complexity.
It is an interesting one, because I always tell the people I work with, leaders and decision makers, I tell them, I want you to make a leap of faith. And a leap of faith is, start by believing that simple is beautiful. So it's very close to that. So what's important is that both in saying simple is beautiful or in saying, keep it simple, stupid, what's important is not to take it to the simplistic side, right? That's the essence, because the simple is not simplistic. Simple is actually digging so hard into a problem that you actually find the essence of the problem at the other end of all the complexity and the fog and the poison that is actually blinding you. It is not looking at something and saying, oh, okay, I got it. Yeah, this is not what it is. So if taken from that point of view, I think these are good examples. I do not believe in dogmas, in just saying, if people want, if for some people...
You're not a man of slogans either.
Well, that I can tell. Some of them are, but if people want to say, if I tell them belief in small and beautiful, and people say, I think, I relate very much to keep it simple, stupid, and I say, why not, right? If the essence of what you're doing is exactly where we're going, I have no problem.
Okay. Yeah. Rend, I think we have to stop here because, unfortunately, as I said, now 60+ minutes are gone.
Right.
I want to thank you warmly for this very enlightening conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And very stimulating. It was for me, and I'm sure it was for those who watched us. So thank you for having spent an hour of your July with us. And I'm saluting particularly some of my friends and partners in business who have been watching from sunny places. This conversation has been recorded and will be aired in a few days on Sensemakers Global YouTube channel. It will be aired on Rend's blog or and website. So for those of you who would like to view it again or some part of it, or share it with friends that you think could be interested, please do so, because I think there is a real wide interest in all what Rend told us. So thanks again, and I'll give you notice for our next conversation of that type, which will be on August 7th, and we'll talk about the Bitcoin. Be reassured, it won't be a long lesson on how the blockchain works, because I would be totally incapable to do so. We will talk about decentralization and how the Bitcoin technology can help us free the human being, not less than that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
And à bientôt.
You're
You're very welcome. Thanks to you.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.